Okay, so we're ready to start. The keynote. It's my pleasure to present Stefania Serafin, which joined recently the Technical University of Denmark. And Stefania, until 2025, she was professor of sonic interaction design at Aalborg University, where she played a leading role in advancing research and education at the intersection of sound, music, and interactive technologies. So now Stefania is part of the University of the Denmark, the Technical University, as I said, and she is continuing her work in sound and multisensory interaction. So I give the floor to Stefania. Thank you for...
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction and the invitation. It's a big honor for me to be here. I'm originally, actually, as you can guess, I'm not Danish. I'm Italian. And I lived in Venice and I studied at the university where Fabio works, the University of Venice, until my bachelor. What you were hearing before was the Danish National Girls Choir singing "The Party Is Over" by Billie Eilish. But the party is not over yet, we are just starting it. So why are we talking about multisensory experiences? So what is a multisensory experience? We have heard a lot yesterday about a beautiful tour that we had during one of the workshops in the boat. That was a great multisensory experience. Unfortunately, I didn't capture it, but I captured something this morning from the window here. So this is an example. If you experience it in real life, unfortunately, this is just a video with only audio-visual experience, but multisensory experiences are pervasive in everyday life. Last night also we had a very different multisensory experience. And I'm sorry to put you on the spot, Roberto and Gualtiero, but that was also a great multisensory experiences. So I would like to ask you, in 2026, what has been, try to think about what has been your favorite multisensory experience so far? I thought about mine, and maybe, I can say that maybe it was when I went to see my favorite pop star, Mika, in Geneva. So this was the multisensory experience. It's a very cheesy multisensory experience, but this is a... Okay. But this is to say that I imagine that none of you, when thinking about your favorite multisensory experience, thought about a technology-mediated multisensory experience. You all thought about something that you experienced in real life. So reality is definitely always better than virtuality and virtual reality. So what do we try to do with technologies? Well, we don't want to recreate them as well as they are in reality. What we want to do is use technology to help help individuals that cannot experience reality, like they cannot exit their home, they cannot move, or they are lacking some sensorial modality. So technologies can help make reality better. So this conference is really an honor, as I said, to be invited here, especially because I never made any advanced visual interface. I work on sound, and why did I work on sound? Why do I work on sound? Because as a child, I was forced by my parents to play the violin, and now I really thank them for that. But at the time, it was, children, 40 years ago, they could not choose like now. Now children, they would rebel. At the time, at least in Italy, we just did what our parents told us to do. But my dream was always to break the violin. And I broke many, actually. Luckily, they were not expensive ones. Then, when I became at the age of college, like university, at the time, there were not interdisciplinary educations in Italy. At least I didn't know about them. So I was studying violin at the conservatory and then also computer science at the university. When I graduated, I wanted to combine the two topics. So I enrolled in this center that is called IRCAM, is a computer music center in Paris, where technologists, artists, and composers, they work together, creating electronic music. Most of the time, the music is not really, at least to my ears, very pleasant. But the idea is to develop new technologies and apply them to music. And I became fascinated, being a violinist, I became fascinated with simulating the violin using computers. And I discovered that the guru in the field was a professor called Julius Smith, who now is retired, but he was professor at Stanford University. So I was very lucky to be admitted to a PhD there, where I was working on simulating the violin using physics. Then I got tired already back then of the United States. I wanted to come back to Europe. And by chance, I ended up in Denmark. And as Fabio mentioned, at Aalborg University, they are very proud of their bridge, but I mean, I'm from Venice, so this is really nothing special. And a few months ago, I joined the Technical University of Denmark. The reason why I left is the topic of another keynote, but if you want some gossips, you can get them tonight. And I work on a multisensory. So our lab is called Multisensory Experience Lab because, as I mentioned, we work on understanding how humans interact in the world with all the different sensory modalities, and also how can we help individuals that lack some sensorial modality to have a better experience in the world again. So we talk about multisensory, but how many senses do we have? Who says 5? Boo, you're very Aristotelian. So there is an article actually from the New Scientist who says that we have 32 senses. So as you can see from this table, many more than 5. And especially so with technologies, as you know, we use mostly our eyes, our ears, and our hands. But when we start looking at spatial computing and immersive technologies, then we also start using our sense of space, what is called the proprioception, so you are navigating in the world. And also some more, not as developed yet, but we are also looking a little bit about olfactory and gustatory technologies that start to appear. But we interact mostly still with the eyes, the hands, and the ears when they work. We will see about that. So artists have been familiar with the multisensory technologies, audiovisual correspondences for a while. So especially the painter Kandinsky, he had an exhibition that ended like in January in Paris. I'm going to show you a little video about that. So Kandinsky was very interested in the correspondence between painting and music. So through his colors and his shapes, he was looking a lot and creating some what is called cross-sensory correspondences between the painting and the music that he was interested to. So this is just a little video from the exhibition. That's his style. So the music of color, the exhibition was called. So yeah, this is the kind of paintings that are very much resembling or reminding him of musical pieces. And this is a particularly more a clearer one, we could say, because we can see here on the top, we see actually a classic musical score, and in the center, as you can see, he's creating some classic cross-modal correspondences. So when the music goes down, also the lines go down, and so the contour is what is called melodic contour now, so following the melody of the music. And on the bottom, he has something that is more abstract, that personally I'm not able to understand how it goes from the center to the bottom, but that is his kind of reasoning to go from music to shapes and figure. Here is another example still from Kandinsky about how to map different music tonality to colors. And so he had actually some very precise, as you can see here, he had some very precise idea of how color was mapped to different sounds. On the other hand, also John Cage, he was a musician who was interested in what we call visual music. So this has a resemblance of a traditional score, but definitely with a lot of interpretation. Now I apologize if you already know this basic, let's say, multisensory correspondences. So they have been investigated a lot in cognitive psychology. So the first one is, how many of you have seen the Takete Maluma? Yeah, half of the audience, let's say. So for those of you who have not seen this example, if I say booba, do you think of the image in the left or on the right? Right. Everybody says right? So there is, and the same if I say takete, or if I say kiki, you think about the one on the left. So there is this correspondence between sounds and shapes. And actually, Davide Rochesso told me that lately, this correspondence also works with chicks. So that was a paper that came out this year in Science. So chicks, like little chickens, if they are told takete, they will go to get the food in a cage that has sharp corners. While if they're told Maluma, they will go to the one with round corner. So it is not only humans. And of course, as always, when there are these interesting effects, they've been investigated and replicated so many times with so many options. So you will find a wide literature on this phenomenon. Another one which is quite common in the way that we interact between audition and vision. This is the first example that shows the interaction between an image and a sound. So I'm going to show you this video and answer this question in your mind. How many times does this disk flash? Oh, no, sorry. Then I play it from here. So, did any of you see two flashes? Some of you did. So this is actually an example. It is the first example that shows how sounds can affect what you see. It's called illusionary flashes. And if you hear two beeps, even if you see only one flash, many people will experience two flashes. So it was named as the first example, also published in Nature, the first example of audition affecting vision. This is also a quite interesting one. Now I'm going to show you a video, and I'm going to ask you, there's a big mosquito, I'm going to ask you to find either a vertical or an horizontal line. Raise your hand when you see a vertical or an horizontal line. Not all of you saw it, but I'm going to give you a better chance now. It is down there in the corner, right? So this is called the peep and pop effect. And what does it show? It shows that if we provide a beeping sound at the same rhythm of the flashing of the object that we are trying to look at, then what happens is that our search becomes easier because it's a matter of attention. So the beeping sound captures the attention to the flashing object. So our search becomes easier. And we use this, for example, in cinematic virtual reality. So, you are wearing a head-mounted display and you are surrounded by a video, but how can you, if you want the viewer to pay attention, not to the field of view, but to something else, we can use a spatial audio to make the user turn attention to a specific object in the scene. In this case, it's like an ecological distractor, we can call it. Then, the last one, this is also pretty famous. It is called, how many of you have seen this McGurk effect? Yeah. Again, 30%. So I apologize for those that have seen it. For those that have not, this is a pretty interesting one. So watch this video and please tell me what this guy is saying. Who hears da? Who hears ga? Who hears ba? Now try to watch it with your eyes closed. Now you're all hearing, okay, shut. Now you all hear the same, right? Ba. But here it is, there is a discrepancy between the lip movement and what the person is saying. So the visual is taking over the audio and we hear something that the person is not saying. So these examples also show something more, which is what is called the ventriloquism effect. This is a very interesting and well-known phenomenon that happens also when we go to movies. The scene is on the screen, the loudspeaker, they are surrounding, but we merge what we see on the screen and what we hear, because there is a phenomenon which is called visual capture. Our eyes are better in space to capture objects than our ears. So if there is a little discrepancy between what we see and what we hear, it should be little, not too big. We associate the object as being in the position where we see. And this will have some implication later when we see how we design multisensory experiences. So just to give some summaries, there has been a lot of work on cross-modal correspondences. There is a tendency that high notes have a movement going up, like we saw before, and loud sound, larger shapes. So there has been a lot of work in art, in science, this Takete-Maluma effect that I talked about, classic phenomenon like ventriloquism effect. It is a very well-researched area. What is very interesting is something that Mark Ernst and colleagues discovered 20 years ago, which is a Bayesian approach to multisensory integration. What does it mean? It means that we have our sensory processing. So here the sensory processing is all the sensory information that if we are normal hearing, normal vision, and normal movement, we have all this information coming to our brain. And how do we make a decision? like in the case of the ventriloquism effect. How do we make a decision where the object is? In that case, we are using the fact that our eyes are dominating. And also it is a continuous process, so we are not static. We move in the world, we act, and we keep inferring decision. And this is extremely important in multisensory integration. And it is an approach that has been developing also over the years. And talking about our body, so we have the classic, the one that used to be the ideal body, the Da Vinci Vitruvian man. And also Le Corbusier also, he had this modular man. And the modular man was the man that determined all the dimension of buildings. So if you are short like me, maybe you cannot reach some objects because you're not a modular man. In audio, we have the dummy head. The dummy head, or the head and torso simulation, it is the equivalent of the modular man. So it is, for those of you who have never seen something like this, it is a device. This specific one has been built by the company Brul & Kjær. And it is a device which the two ears, they actually have one microphone each. And what it is used is to capture sound, so that when we listen, we can hear sound in space. So what is called binaural recordings. So this is the one we have in the lab, and this works very well for Jesper, who works at the conservatory, who looks like the dummy head, or another Jesper, who is an engineer at GN, who also looks like the dummy head. But in real life, we are not all Jesper. We all have bodies that are very different from the dummy head, and also the shape of our ears matters. So this in audio is called called the head-related transfer function. What does it mean? It means that the shape of our ears, but also the shape of our body, they affect how we perceive sound in space. So in research, there is still a lot of discussion. Do we need to make this? This is like a filter. Do we need to make this filter as personalized, so each our own, or can we use this generic dummy head? And so what happens if we use the generic dummy head? Of course, there are lots of databases, so the complexity of obtaining this is very low, but also the spatial quality is very low. On the other hand, you can go to Meta Reality Labs. They have this very sophisticated, so you need, first of all, a completely echo-free, it's called an echoic room, and then you need a device that you sit there, the device turns around, and then it measures the response of your ears in 360 degrees. Of course, this is not something that everybody has at home. Can be also a compromise. So we had a postdoc, Simone Spagnol, now he's working at UAV in Vicenza, and the idea was, can we have a database of ears? And this is another example of Jesper, so another brand, but looking pretty much alike. So what he did, he molded different shapes of ear. This was part of a Marie Curie project. And the idea was that through machine learning, can we match the perfect ear? Not the perfect, but the closest ear to your own ear. So it is, in a way, it is a trade-off between having the individual measure and having a completely generic one. So it looks a little bit like you, but not completely. So which one would we pick? Which one do we pick? Well, actually, we talked about multisensory integration, right? And we talked about that visual dominate in spatial awareness. So there are studies that show that the personalized one really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because if we are exposed to visual stimuli, then the visual stimuli, even if the audio is not precise, the visual stimuli will capture the audio. And we can actually adapt to this discrepancy. And also, if you think about if you are in a virtual reality experience, like in the real world, if you hear a sound, then you turn, and maybe when you hear the first time, you're not sure where it is, but then when you turn, maybe you also see the object, and then you create this coupling. So likely in multisensory interactive environments, this personalization doesn't matter. Also, there are studies, I think this is such a sad study in a way, because they took an owl, it's a very famous one from '85, they took an owl and they used some prism to mess up their visual field. And after very short time, the owl actually adapted and created this audiovisual correspondence towards the object that they could see. So they are, even if they have a very strong auditory perception, this was easily and quickly, because our brain is plastic and adapts very easily to new stimuli. So the owl was also adapting. So we can, like the owl, we can change our perception of multisensory integration by having this reconfigured, let's say. So far we have talked about audiovisual, but recently we actually started a project about virtual reality for individuals with low or no vision. So this seems like such a silly project, because why do you need to use the red body display if they cannot see? Well, there are actually different reasons. First of all, being low vision doesn't mean that you cannot see anything. So you can still see some contour, for example, unless you are completely visually impaired. And also, even if those individuals that are completely visually impaired, even if they are wearing a hand-mounted display and they cannot experience anything visually, you can still use the sensors of the head-mounted display to create an interactive audio experience, and also you make them be included in experiences that only normal visual individuals can usually try. So in this project, what we are trying to understand, we don't have an answer yet because we basically just started, but the idea of this project is, maybe in this situation, having a precise audio representation is very important, because visually impaired, they can rely only on the hearing and also the proprioception, so the sense of body in space, and the sense of touch, of course. But maybe completely lacking the visual feedback makes important to develop more other senses. Another thing about our ears is that the shape change over time. So this HRTF, you measure it maybe not from one day to another, but from years to another, then it will change. It's not going to be constant. And also, obviously, our hearing ability. All of us will have some hearing decline, no matter how much you take care of your ears. So that is also change. And beside the shape of our ears, there is a very interesting work by Andrew Hugill about oral diversity. So we have so many different ways our ear works. So we have individually that are very strong hearing impaired or less visually impaired, and we can have hearing impaired in one ear and not in another. We can hear sounds that don't exist, have auditory hallucination. So our ears are very, very complex organs, much more complex than we think about. So now talking about the topic of oral diversity. So a couple of years ago, we started a collaboration with the Royal Danish Academy of Music and the hospital. At the hospital, they have a center which is called Copenhagen Hearing and Balance Center, and what they're interested to do is to investigate how can we help both children and elderly to improve their awareness about their ears, but also have better training. Better training and better information material, because nowadays at the hospital they have a lot of brochures, but people don't read it. So they want to understand, can we provide some information in a more interesting way? Or can we use the technologies to train these individuals? So in order to understand that, we ran this workshop, we called it Cool Year, and the idea was that to bring a lot of technologies. I'm going to show you a video actually about the workshop because it gives a better idea. We invited people of all ages, and we had games to train ears, we had music experiences, as you can see in this video. So you could see there were music experiences with benches that were vibrating according to the music for hearing impaired. There were virtual reality simulations and games to train how to be in different spaces with different acoustic environments. But after this workshop, we noticed that none of the children came to the music experiences. They were all playing the games in virtual reality. And on the other hand, none of the elderly were interested in using virtual reality. They were all interested in having a better musical experience. Many of these individuals, maybe they were musicians, or they used to go to concerts. Now this experience is ruined because they have a degraded hearing. So what happens a lot is that all the instruments, if there is like a band or if there is a quartet, all the instruments, they get really mixed together, so their musical experience is really not pleasant anymore. And which is a shame because then they refrain from going to concerts. So we looked at different ways to help these individuals. And one way that we wanted to do this is by using music visualization. So we created, I'm going to show you two of the experiences. One is called Holoband. This is an individual experience. This was specifically created for musicians that played in a band, but now they have a very hard time playing in a band because they cannot recognize which instrument is which. So the idea, let me show you in a video. What you see in with the HoloLens, that now is kind of discontinued actually, you see in augmented reality, you see a representation of the different instruments, the guitar, the drum, in the same location as where the sound is. So what the person can do, can move the instruments around and play them individually. So this is how the guitar sounds. And now here the guitar together with the drum. So to train, to re-recognize the instruments in such a way that then they can have a better experience when they see it in real life. So just to give you a short... so this is the musician. So we co-designed this experience with the musician who was telling us his issues. And then he walks around, and this is the therapist that can move the instrument in a tablet in space, and then the person can hear and see it in 3D and to train. So this was somehow successful, not super successful for two reasons. The HoloLens is extremely hard to calibrate, so of course if the sound and the visual, they were really far apart, this ventriloquism effect that we talked about before didn't work at all. And also because even if it was augmented reality, so they could still see the real world, they specifically asked for that, it was still a very personal experience, I mean very isolating more than personal. So they was not a complete success. So then we thought about how can we create social experiences. So we had the different concerts again at the Royal Danish Academy of Music. One of the concerts was specifically designed as a visualization. so music visualization. In this collaboration, actually, interestingly enough, the hospital didn't want to collaborate because the hospital is extremely against visualization. The reason is because if you stimulate individuals which have still some hearing capabilities, if you stimulate them too much visually, that part of the brain that could be dedicated to auditory input is taken over by the visual input. And instead, what they want to do is audio therapy, so establish the part that could have auditory input. So also they are extremely against sign language for the same reason. Only, of course, for individuals that have a chance to recover that part. So, as I said before, we invited everybody, but young people don't like classical music, at least in Denmark. So we had only 6 individuals that were less than 26 years old, and the biggest audience was between 66 and up, let's say. And also they were all with very different hearing abilities. So 28 were what we call normal hearing. Some, they were hearing aid users. Some cochlear implant, CI. The cochlear implant is when you are severely disabled, hearing disabled, and then you get implanted some electrodes, and then they go directly to the auditory nerve. And then some, they had one device on one side and one on the other. So in one ear was not extremely damaged, so they had an hearing aid, and on the other, a cochlear implant. So let me show you a little bit. So this is from a string quartet. What was happening is that each musician in the quartet had a microphone, and the microphone was tracking the sound, and then through some pitch tracking algorithm, the music was visualized, one for each member of the quartet. So that required, of course, low latency in the pitch tracking algorithm, and the mapping was pretty intuitive. So if the music goes up, also you will see the trajectory. Are they playing? Yeah, now they start. As you can see, the audience is not exactly children. So at the beginning, it's easy to follow. It's almost like a bad version of a Kandinsky painting. I don't have time to show more, but I'm going to be around if you want to see longer of the video. So what is interesting is how did they react? So this is just an example of 4 voices. You see, so like the red is one instrument, that probably the viola that goes, so that the vertical line corresponds to the pitch they're playing, and then the time is on the horizontal, and you see they have a lot of vibrato, all of them. So we got a very diverse result in this. So we both ran some questionnaires, but also we, with 16 individuals, we decided to have more in-depth interviews. And some loved the visualization, some they hated it. So those, they found it useful to follow the score. Others decided it was really disturbing. I want to close my eyes. And some asked actually for an introduction. But this is also a trade-off in this, what is called concert research. So you would like to get some data, but these people, they're coming here to have a pleasant experience. You don't want them to spend too much time in getting trained or getting tested, because then that would ruin their musical experience. For example, in another concert, we had this melodic contour identification test, and one of the person at a certain point said, "Oh, I cannot take this anymore," because it was like he had to spend like 20 minutes saying if the melody was going up or down, or like if it was so basically they need to tell the shape of the melody. And so they didn't come for that. They were coming to have a concert. So there is this difficulty, especially in such a diverse population, in a social space, to get some meaningful data from this kind of ecological, let's say, experiments. And again, as I mentioned, this experiment or this approach of using visualization to help hearing impaired is really not at all appreciated by the clinicians in the hospital. So maybe I talk just very quickly, because we don't have much time, about another project about, we talked about hearing impaired. What about if you hear too much? So this is what is called auditory hallucination, and it has been shown that avatar therapy actually can help. So we have a PhD student that just graduated, Anas Bargum, who is working on using virtual reality-based avatar therapy to help individuals with auditory hallucination. So how does it work? You are creating your own. So auditory hallucination is obviously when you hear voices that are not there. So the therapy works that you instruct the therapist about which kind of voices do you hear, which kind of avatar do you see, and by reconstructing a digital version of this avatar, then what happens is that it helps. It has shown to actually help. There were some good results in this project in Denmark. Using our role was to create the voice transformations. So in the first version of the voice transformation, which was based on what is called the face vocoder, I'm going to tell you in a second what it is. So there were some requests for improving the quality. So the therapy seemed to work, but the quality of a voice vocoder sometimes was mentioned to be a little bit too robotics. So that ruined the experience of matching voices. So the realism of the avatar, particularly the auditory dimension, may facilitate engagement. So I don't have much time to talk about how speech is produced, but basically we have the vocal cord and then our vocal tract that acts like a filter, and then the movement of the mouth, of course, affect what you say. And so in the traditional voice conversion pre-machine learning algorithm, there is basically a simulation, what is called a source filter approach. And in our simulation, we used instead a deep learning approach, which facilitated an improvement, or we were looking if this approach could facilitate an improvement in the sound quality. And in order to do that, so we identified 4 elements that were very important in the voice simulation. So the prosody, the identity of the voice, the content, and the emotional. So as I mentioned, in the first approach, we were just using traditional speech synthesis. But then with voice manipulation through machine learning, we achieve something that this is the software that the therapist is using. This is the PhD that just finished the project on this, Anas.
Recording my voice. 1, 2, 3. 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 Recording.
So you got the point. In real time, what is important is for the therapist to be able to manipulate the parameters while the patient is there, so in real time. And I will go through quickly to this so we can have time also for questions. We tested our solutions versus commercially available. And this project was done 3 years ago, this comparison. Nowadays, voice transformation algorithms have already improved so much that the results are kind of not as meaningful. But at the time, we saw that speech-to-speech algorithms, they were better perceived by the audience because of their better naturalness and ability to capture also the nuances and the expressiveness that the text-to-speech algorithm were not able to. Nowadays, we still have some text-to-speech algorithms that they don't sound extremely natural, but as you know very well, the technology keeps changing. So these improvements, they are getting there very much. But also the look of the avatar, of course, is also important, not just the voice. And we were trying to create avatars as realistic as possible, not to enter into, so with some sort of animated aspect in order not to encounter what is called like the uncanny valley effect. But overall, so they liked the speech-to-speech generated avatars, but still the sense of presence was not completely achieved. So to conclude, in the 80s, the architect Ronald Mays introduced the concept of universal design as the design of products and environment to be usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design. So he was also an architect in a wheelchair, so he was encountering lots of obstacles, as you can imagine, in navigating buildings. And he developed several principles: equitable use, flexibility in use, simple intuitive use, tolerance for error, low physical effort, science and space. Some years ago, Davide Rochesso led a cost action called Sonic Interaction Design, which was about understanding how sound is an important element when we interact in a digital world. So interaction design, but with a sonic twist. And I think we can move from sonic interaction design to sonic universal design. So where we want to understand how we interact with sound, but also taking into consideration the different abilities of the different individuals. So in that way, maybe AI can help us in personalized solution for each, because a solution fits all really doesn't work. We need to personalize how we interact with technology depending on different user needs. So I think we can stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefania, for your inspiring talk. We have time for questions. I guess there is a mic somewhere. Okay.
Hi, thank you for the presentation, really interesting. I was wondering if you ever had some experimentation with ADD people and neurodivergent people and how they react, if you have some suggestions.
Yes, so we had some projects about helping individuals, mostly teenagers with autism, to cope or to be reintroduced in everyday life. Like there was a project also yesterday I saw from Udine and Bolzano, I think we had something similar about children that are afraid of going to shop in a supermarket. So in that case, because it's very overwhelming. So the idea was to create the supermarket in virtual reality and then see if recreating that in virtual reality, then they could also then go in real life. And the same with being introduced to school Or one that was particularly nice is in Denmark there is a lot of this singing, like it's called common singing. So you sing a lot in school. But some of these children, they didn't feel like singing in public. So we created a virtual reality experience with the girls that you saw in the choir, so you could see them in 360, and then the child was actually singing with them, and then he actually then felt more like going to school and sing with the other children. So this kind of exposure therapy, it actually works very well, and it is demonstrated in many situations. It's a very interesting topic.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. You mentioned at the beginning the 32 senses.
Yeah.
So do you see in the future ways to leverage all these senses, like this bigger space, and how do you envision to do this?
Yes, so I think many are already addressed by technology, maybe not so commonly, but like the sense of balance, for example, the hospital is very interested in training also balance, because many individuals, especially elderly, that have reduced hearing loss, reduced hearing, they also have difficulty in keeping balance. So there is a tight connection. Also, bladder stretch, I'm not really sure, but actually it's quite interesting because there is a PhD student at the hospital who is looking at the relationship between the gut signals and the motion signals. And apparently there is this gut-brain connection, which is investigated a lot. So I think, we are all... there is more and more research that shows how we are all interconnected, our brain and our bodies and the different body parts. So I think it's very interesting to understand how more than traditional, let's say, senses can be studied and help individuals who may have a bladder problem, or I don't know. I hope I answered your question.
I have a question too, if I may.
Of course.
Okay. Many years ago, I did some experimentation of mapping virtual environment to sound and using sound as a way for navigating this environment. And we did some experiment, and the main difficulty was to make people understand that the sound could have a value for interaction and not only an aesthetic value. Mm-hmm. And it happened that I was in Japan at the time, and I found Japanese more open to this kind of interpretation. So I was curious to hear about your opinion about if, in your opinion, this is still the situation, and if there are cultural differences in this respect.
Yes, so there are both cultural differences and also personally difference. Like you mentioned, individuals with the ADHD, they don't like to be exposed to too many sounds. And also the difficulties is more, there are two aspects. There is the aspect of the designer, I would say, that how you design the sound, the better, let's say, you design, the more they are easier to understand. But also training, because it's not something that we are, we need to learn this mapping between the sound and the action that you have to perform. So.
Thank you. Other question? Okay.
Thank you so much. I was wondering, you said it in the last, I think we have seen so much change over the last 3 years with transformation between senses. I think a lot of the advances we have seen now in AI is very much on text, a little bit on picture, but the real advantage or advances have been on the textual. But we see now sort of this mapping. Can you let us a bit know what you see at the moment? What are sort of the things that really have changed the audio? I think if you look at voices, at the things we can change, what is really sort of this on the multimodal side, what we need to look out now for the next, for the coming period, beyond what we have seen? What is your sort of speculation in that space?
So I see, there is this conference, Digital Audio Effects, which is for most for those that design this kind of algorithm. And everything has been a shift. We used to look at the equation and solve them properly. Now the difficult part is just black box AI, which is, so if you want to simulate, let's say, the bow playing a string, that is the most complicated part when you play the violin. And if you create a mathematical equation, then it's not going to sound like a perfect violin. It's going to sound like a boat many times. But if you use it with machine learning, then it sounds like a beautiful violin. But then what did you learn? You're just creating a database, and then there has been a huge improvement in the quality, in the sound, both in speech, but also in musical instrument synthesizer. Now everybody uses AI because you just sound better. But we lack this fundamental understanding. So there is a tendency to go, for example, towards physics-based AI, or explainable. So try to understand actually why the algorithm is actually working. I'm not an expert in AI at all.
Okay, there is time for a last short question. If no. Okay, otherwise Stefania will be here till the end of the conference.
Yes.
So I guess she will be happy to answer to all your curiosity and answers and questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Stefania. And